When the newly elected American Pope Robert Prevost extends an invitation to Donald Trump for a private meeting in the Vatican, he poses a question few have dared to ask. What do you want to be remembered for? Instead of diplomatic pleasantries, the Pope shares insights from decades spent with Peru's poorest communities, presenting a different vision of leadership. I don't need a leader who sees my strength. I need one who understands my pain. For once, Trump finds himself truly listening, not just waiting to respond. The invitation arrives at Mar-a-Lago on embossed Vatican stationery, delivered by an unassuming courier who declines refreshments and departs as quietly as he came. Donald Trump holds the cream-colored envelope, examining the ornate papal seal before breaking it open. The message inside is concise, penned in a steady, unadorned script. Dear Mr. President, it would be my great honor to welcome you for a private conversation at the Vatican next Thursday, should your schedule permit. No staff, no press, no formal agenda, just two men with distinct perspectives on leadership and service. Respectfully, Robert Francis Prevost, Bishop of Rome. Trump reads the note twice before placing it on his desk. The new pope, the first American to hold the position in the Church's 2,000-year history, has been a figure of global fascination since white smoke rose above the Sistine Chapel just yesterday. Cardinal Prevost was considered an unexpected choice, an Augustinian monk who spent decades in Chicago's roughest neighborhoods before leading the Church's efforts in Peru. His election surprised Vatican insiders, who had anticipated a more conventional European or perhaps a candidate from the global south. What's your take on this pope? Trump asks, gesturing to the invitation on his desk as he addresses his chief of staff. The advisor picks up the note, scans it, and furrows his brow slightly. It's hard to say so far, he's only been pope for a day. Liberals seem to claim him as one of their own because of his work with the poor. Conservatives point to his theological orthodoxy. Everyone's projecting onto him what they want to see. Sounds familiar, Trump says with a wry smile. With all due respect, his advisor continues, I'm not sure this meeting makes sense. There's no clear political upside. Catholic votes are already split, and this man spent 20 years in Peru, he's likely more sympathetic to immigrants than your base. Trump leans back in his chair, considering. But he's an American. The first American pope ever. And he reached out directly, not through channels, not as part of some agenda. Just man to man. He taps the invitation with his index finger. That's unusual. His advisor nods reluctantly. True, but what's his angle? Everyone has an angle. Trump falls silent for a moment, gazing past his chief of staff at the palm trees swaying outside the window. At 78, he has spent decades in the public eye, cultivating an image of strength and determination. Few in his orbit challenge his decisions. Even fewer invite him to conversations where he lacks a guaranteed upper hand. Call the pilot, he says finally. Tell him we're flying to Rome. The Vatican gleams under the late morning sun, its travertine facades almost radiant against a clear Italian sky. Trump's motorcade, arranged by the American embassy rather than the Vatican, navigates streets quietly cleared of the usual crowds of tourists and pilgrims. He notes the absence of the typical pomp that accompanies visits from heads of state or former presidents, no Swiss guards in their colorful uniforms, no clergy in formal regalia awaiting his arrival. Instead, as the car stops at a side entrance to the Apostolic Palace, a lone priest stands waiting, dressed in simple black attire with only a small cross visible at his collar. Mr. President, the priest says as Trump steps out, welcome to the Vatican. I'm Father Marco, the Pope's secretary. His Holiness is expecting you. Trump nods and follows Father Marco through corridors adorned with Renaissance art and ancient tapestries. He had visited the Vatican before, during his presidency, a formal state visit with photographers capturing every moment. Advisors briefing him on protocol, Melania at his side in a traditional black dress and veil as they met Pope Francis in the Grand Apostolic Palace. This is different. No press, no delegation, no palm fronds. Father Marco leads him not to the official papal offices where heads of state are typically received, but through a series of increasingly modest hallways until they reach a plain wooden door. His Holiness prefers to meet visitors here, Father Marco explains, gesturing to the door. It was originally an office used by Pope John XIV. Pope Robert believes it fosters genuine conversation. The room beyond is modest, a small, sunlit study with simple furnishings, a wooden desk, 2 chairs, a bookshelf lined with well-worn theological texts. Pope Robert Prevost rises as Trump enters, his white cassock unadorned except for a simple pectoral cross. At 68, he carries the quiet gravitas of a man shaped by years of service, his face lined but his eyes sharp and attentive. "Mr. President," he says, extending a hand, "thank you for coming." Trump shakes his hand, noting the firm grip. "Your Holiness," he replies, taking the offered seat. The Pope sits across from him, the morning light filtering through a window and illuminating the space between them. There's a moment of silence, not uncomfortable but deliberate, as if the Pope is taking Trump's measure, not as a political figure, but as a man. Then he speaks, his voice steady and unhurried. "May I ask you something, Donald? What do you want to be remembered for?" The question catches Trump off guard. He's accustomed to diplomatic small talk, discussions of policy, or negotiations with clear stakes. This feels different, direct, almost piercing. He shifts in his seat, searching for an answer that feels authentic rather than rehearsed. "I've always wanted to be remembered as a winner," he says after a pause. "Someone who got things done, big things. Buildings, deals, policies that made America stronger. Someone who didn't back down." Pope Robert nods, his expression open and genuinely curious, devoid of the cold calculation Trump has come to expect from high-level meetings. "There are always people who can't or won't be helped," Trump adds cautiously. "That's the reality. I focus on the greater good, on decisions that benefit the most Americans." The Pope inclines his head. A utilitarian approach, the greatest good for the greatest number. He leans forward slightly. "May I share something from my own experience?" Trump nods, relieved to shift away from the directness of the question. "Before I was called to Rome," the Pope begins, "I spent 20 years in Peru, mostly in Chulcanas, a region marked by extreme poverty and the aftermath of political violence. The people there taught me lessons about power and vulnerability that shaped my understanding of what leadership truly means." As he speaks, his voice takes on a new depth, more vivid, rooted in lived experience rather than abstract theology. "I once met a man named Hector who had lost everything in the conflict between the government and the Shining Path guerrillas, his family, his home, his livelihood. When I first encountered him, he was living in the burned-out shell of what had been his small farm, surviving on the charity of neighbors who had little to give themselves." The Pope pauses, his gaze distant with memory. "I expected anger from him, or at least bitterness. Instead, I found profound dignity. Father," he told me, "I don't need a leader who sees my strength. I need one who understands my pain." Pope Robert turns his attention back to Trump. "That statement stayed with me for decades. It offered a model of leadership different from the one we often celebrate, not the strong man who overcomes obstacles through sheer will, but the attentive presence that helps carry a burden that might otherwise crush the human spirit." Trump remains silent during the story but now leans forward. "With all due respect, Your Holiness, running a country isn't like parish ministry. Nations face real enemies, external and internal. Strength isn't optional. It's necessary." "I agree that strength matters," the Pope responds. "But I wonder if we've defined it too narrowly. Is it stronger to dominate a conversation or to truly listen? To impose your will or to seek understanding? To never admit mistakes or to grow through acknowledging them?" Trump feels a flicker of irritation. This feels perilously close to criticism, veiled as philosophical inquiry. "The reality of global leadership is complex," he says firmly. "Decisions affect millions of lives. Mistakes can't always be admitted without causing cascading consequences. And enemies exploit any perceived weakness quickly. Power isolates, the Pope says, nodding. I'm already feeling that, even here. The higher you rise, the harder it becomes to see the ground clearly. But that's why we must work harder to remember what leadership is for, not to be served, but to serve. He gestures toward the window, where ancient olive trees sway gently in the Vatican gardens. Those trees have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the succession of popes, some saintly, some corrupt, wars and reconciliations, triumphs and disasters. They remind me that power is always temporary, always borrowed. The question is, what do we do with it while it's in our hands? Despite himself, Trump finds his irritation giving way to reluctant admiration. There's something compelling in this man's perspective, not because Trump necessarily agrees, but because it's clearly born of genuine conviction, not political maneuvering. You speak as if power is a burden, Trump observes. To me, it's been a tool to achieve necessary things others couldn't or wouldn't do. Perhaps it can be both, the Pope suggests. A tool and a burden, a privilege and a responsibility. He offers a slight smile. Though I suspect we might differ on which aspects we emphasize. Sunlight streams through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air between them. The Pope reaches for a glass of water, and Trump notices a faint tremble in his hand, not the weakness of age, but the lingering effect of an old injury. The Lima earthquake, 2007, Pope Robert says, following Trump's gaze to his hand. A wall collapsed while we were searching for survivors, damaging the nerves in my wrist and fingers. Doctors thought I might lose full function, but it healed better than expected. He flexes his fingers deliberately. Not perfect, but enough to do what's needed. Trump finds himself unexpectedly moved by this casual revelation, a testament to hands-on service, literal scars earned not in political battles but in physical presence amid suffering. It contrasts sharply with his own carefully curated exterior, his aversion to any sign of weakness or limitation. You've lived a very different life from mine, Trump acknowledges, and the Pope chuckles softly. Indeed, though perhaps there are more parallels than might be immediately obvious. What parallels could there be between a monk working in South American slums and my life? Trump asks, genuinely curious. We've both wielded significant influence, albeit in very different arenas, the Pope replies. We've both inspired deep loyalty and fierce criticism. We've both made decisions that affected lives we'll never personally encounter. His expression grows more reflective. And I suspect we've both experienced the peculiar loneliness that comes with positions where few treat you as just a man. That last observation strikes a chord. Trump rarely admits, even to himself, the isolation that has accompanied his rise to the pinnacle of power, the way genuine friendships have gradually been replaced by transactional relationships, the constant calculation behind every interaction, the exhaustion of never being able to simply exist without performing some version of Donald Trump. The cameras never really go away, he says, surprising himself with the admission. Even when they're not physically there, you're still being watched, judged, interpreted. Until the real person behind the public image becomes almost abstract, even to ourselves, the Pope adds quietly. Sometimes I don't recognize the man people think I am. Trump continues, the words coming from a deeper place than his usual calculated responses. The one either idolized by supporters or demonized by opponents. Pope Robert nods. Neither justifying nor condemning. Few of us do. It's the great paradox of public life. We become projections of others' hopes and fears until we risk losing ourselves in the image. He leans forward slightly, his gaze direct but empathetic. May I ask you something personal, Donald? Trump hesitates, then nods. What did the young Donald Trump, before the wealth, before the fame, before the power, hope to achieve in this life? Not in material terms, but in terms of good, of contributing to something greater than himself. The question cuts through layers of public persona built over decades. Trump finds himself reaching for memories he seldom revisits, conversations with his mother about helping others, early ambitions that went beyond mere winning or accumulating wealth. I wanted to build things that mattered, he says slowly. Not just buildings, but a legacy that would improve lives, solve problems. He shakes his head slightly. It sounds simplistic now. Maybe naive. Or maybe deeply significant, the Pope counters. Perhaps that original impulse, that desire to do something meaningful, hasn't vanished. It's just been overshadowed by the complexities and compromises that accumulate over a lifetime. Trump falls silent, struck by the possibility that beneath the layers of success and controversy, there might still be an initial, more idealistic drive, perhaps dormant, but not extinguished. Pope Robert glances at the simple watch on his wrist. "I've kept you longer than intended," he says. "Before you go, let me share one final thought." "Please," Trump says, realizing he means it. "It's not too late," the Pope says simply. "To be the man you once hoped to become." Before the wealth, before the fame, before the power, there was a vision of the good you wanted to achieve. That original impulse hasn't disappeared. It's just waiting to be remembered. He rises from his chair, and Trump follows. They stand facing each other in the sunlit study, two men from vastly different backgrounds and worldviews who, for a brief hour, have engaged not as symbols or offices, but as individuals. "Thank you for coming," Pope Robert says, extending his hand again. "I've appreciated your candor, and your perspective," Trump replies, the word feeling inadequate but lacking a better alternative. The Pope smiles, the warmth in his eyes suggesting he understands what's left unsaid. "Safe travels, Donald. My door remains open if you ever wish to continue our conversation." Father Marco appears as if on cue, ready to escort Trump back through the Vatican's labyrinthine halls. As they walk, Trump is unusually quiet, reflecting on the encounter that just concluded. It wasn't what he'd expected, not a political negotiation, not a moral lecture, not an attempt to extract concessions or commitments. By the time he reaches his motorcade, Trump has outwardly regained his composure, projecting the confidence his security team and the Vatican officials coordinating his visit expect. But inwardly, the Pope's words continue to resonate, especially that final remark, "It's not too late to be the man you once hoped to become." The motorcade moves swiftly through Rome's narrow streets toward the airport, where Trump's private jet awaits. His security team expects him to immediately start calling advisors eager for details about the historic meeting, to the press to highlight its significance, to allies to help shape the public narrative around it. Instead, he gazes out the window in uncharacteristic silence, watching the ancient city glide by, its ruins and monuments a testament to the impermanence of even the most impressive human achievements. His chief of security, seated across from him, clears his throat. "Everything all right, sir?" Trump nods. "Fine." The embassy arranged a brief press meet at the airport. "If you'd like to make a statement about the meeting," Trump considers for a moment, then shakes his head. "No need. It was a private conversation." The chief of security looks surprised but doesn't press further. As the motorcade continues toward the airport, Trump finds his thoughts returning to the Pope's question about legacy, not the external markers of success he typically cites, but the deeper question of what his life has contributed to the human endeavor. Has he truly built things that matter? Has he used his extraordinary platform and resources to address suffering he might have alleviated? Has he prioritized winning over solving the problems he identified? These are uncomfortable questions, ones he might once have dismissed as naive concerns of those who don't grasp the harsh realities of power. But coming from Pope Robert, a man who has clearly wrestled with his own relationship to influence and its proper use, they carry a different weight. Trump isn't a man prone to sudden personal transformations or abrupt reversals. A decades-crafted public identity and deeply ingrained thought patterns aren't undone by a single conversation. His core beliefs about strength, negotiation, and leadership remain intact. Yet, as the plane lifts off from Italian soil and heads toward the Atlantic, Trump finds himself in a place of unusual introspection. There was something disarming about the Pope's presence, not weakness, but a different kind of strength than the one Trump typically recognizes or values, not a commanding force that demands attention and submission, but an attentive presence that creates space for genuine encounter. He wasn't what I expected, Trump mutters, almost to himself. His personal aide, seated nearby, looks up. Sir. Trump waves a hand dismissively. Nothing. Just thinking out loud. He shifts his gaze to the window, watching the Italian countryside give way to the Mediterranean coast, then the vast expanse of the Atlantic below. Rome fades into the distance, but the conversation in the sunlit study lingers, its questions settling into the quiet spaces between thoughts. What had the young Donald Trump hoped to achieve beyond wealth and fame? What would it mean, at this stage of life, to reconnect with that initial impulse toward meaningful contribution? Is it truly possible, as the Pope suggested, to remember and reclaim a more fundamental vision of legacy? Trump has no immediate answers to these questions. His instinct is to push them aside, to redirect his focus to the practical matters of influence and advantage that have defined his approach to life for decades. But for now, as the plane carries him westward, he lets them linger, not as challenges to overcome or problems to solve, but as invitations to a different way of measuring a life's significance. That, perhaps, was the Pope's most effective message, not a demand for immediate change, but a reminder that alternative paths remain possible, that beneath the accumulation of habits, personas, and expectations, something original and potentially more authentic still waits to be rediscovered. What this particular conversation might ultimately lead to remains to be seen. But for perhaps the first time in decades, Donald Trump has encountered something rare in his world of rallies and resistance, not an opponent or a supporter, but simply a man who offered him a mirror unmarred by either adulation or disdain. And sometimes, from one quiet conversation, a transformation begins. This concludes our narrative journey. I trust you found this gripping saga of intrigue, cutting-edge innovation, and astonishing discoveries captivating. From where are you tuning in today? I'm curious to learn which corner of the globe this tale has touched. If this escapade held your interest, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for a steady stream of compelling, mind-expanding stories just like this one. Fresh material is posted frequently, ensuring you're always in the loop for the newest spellbinding adventures. Be sure to pass this video along to your loved ones and friends. It's a great way to share positivity and insight while expanding our circle of story enthusiasts. Your encouragement is invaluable. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to welcoming you back for the next tale.